Astor Place, Cooper Square, like 91 or 2. I'm not sure the year now. Around 91 too. And he's standing in a place where if you took a picture in the same spot today, you'd be looking at just like horrible new glass building, kind of looking down Lafayette Street. And he's got a sign on the ground in front of him that says, I think it says "Lazy Bastard." And he's got a little boombox thing with a mic attached to it. He's singing his guts out. And I remember what he was singing to was Blue Rawls, "You'll Never Fall." And I used to see that guy all the time, and I just thought he was amazing. He's like one of those people that looks like this complete loser, nerd, homeless guy, but can really belt. And he's been on like reality TV, one of those contests shows. Some like live at the Apollo singing contest thing, and it's the big joke. The stringy-haired white dude with Coke bottle glasses that are broken gets up and does "Let's Get It On," and everybody in the audience goes like, "Oh my God!" Because I can't believe how soulful and awesome he is. And he looks like he must smell from yards away, and everyone has to just act like, "Oh my God, this white boy's amazing." And so I have a picture of him from like more than 30 years ago.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And the thing is, like, I didn't know I would ever be able to prove his existence again.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if he was going to vanish off the face of the earth, die, change his life, who knows. But I felt like there was something important about having fixed this thing from my world at my time. And here it is, you know, like 30 years later, and I still have the picture, and he's still in the world, and he's exactly the same. And so now I can prove that,
right,
instead of proving that he once existed, which is what I kind of like thought, hey, maybe someday I'll be able to prove this guy existed, instead of, because it was really lame to just describe him to somebody the way I just did for you. I can tell you all about him, and that's information, but I wanted to just show you what I saw. And so that was my first experience, I think, with being able to like take a picture that felt like the thing I wanted to prove. And now what makes me extra excited is that there's something else to prove with that same picture, right? Because photos are so much more than whatever we tell ourselves they are when we're making them. We just don't know what.
Yeah.
We don't know what yet. We don't know how the world's going to change. Are you recording?
I am.
So I was just writing my current workshop students about this morning, because I had this great experience how long? Like 8 years ago or something like that, where the friends of mine and the people who hung out when I was like 18 years old, fresh out of school, you know, living in my first place on my own with friends. The crew that I used to hang out with in those days, we all got together and had kind of a reunion weekend 8 or 10 years ago in San Francisco. We all stayed in the B&B together for a long weekend and caught up, and it was amazing and awesome. And one of my friends brought all these videos that he had made with an early camcorder back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us had never seen them, or had only seen little clips from them. We'd never just like sat down, and we'd certainly not sat down together and watched ourselves into these things. And it was fascinating. There were all these things that you could predict when we were that age that we were. Of course, we knew that someday we would look at this and we would be much older, and we would look very young to ourselves, and you know, that's kind of obvious. And then there were ways in which the world has changed, which we could somewhat predict. You know, oh yeah, someday this will look like the old days, but right now it just looks like our life.
Mm-hmm.
But then there were other things. The one that really was hilarious to me was a constant feature of our life in those days, whether we were at a motel swimming pool or in our living room in Arlington, Virginia, was constantly about smoking and cigarettes. And do you have cigarettes? Do you have cigarettes? I have cigarettes. Do you need a cigarette? And everything was this constant reaching for packs and holding packs, and it was all of us. And if somebody's standing in a swimming pool, as I mentioned, there's a pack of cigarettes on the diving board next to them, which they're reaching for the smoking sitting in the pool. So it's like this constant. Thank you. And I remember one of my friends at a certain point said, "Oh my God, I can't believe how constantly we're handling packs of cigarettes in this fucking video." And I said, "Yeah, nowadays it would be phones." Right?
Yeah.
So we might have even known, if you'd asked us at the time, that someday some of us won't smoke, or whatever, like maybe smoking will be outlawed. Like, we didn't know, but we could have speculated. But I don't think any of us would have speculated, and now we're going to have this other object that's shaped kind of the same and is kind of the same size that we're going to be just completely obsessed with and in constant kind of relationship with. And that makes me think someday, like 20 years from now or 30 years from now, as this case seems to indicate, we're going to look back at videos of us with these things, or photos of people walking around staring into these things, and it's going to seem really weird and old-fashioned, and it will really cement things in time. So I think it's interesting to think about all the ways in which we can't predict that change, and that means our photos will continue to have different features to them, different values, different criteria for interest than whatever we're able to assess right now.
I agree. I definitely agree. The reason I asked that question about the first photo that you could think of is because over the past few months, I guess, maybe a little before that, Jeff has been sharing work from like the 80s. Like stuff that was pre-sidewalk, stuff that I don't know if he showed before that, and I just wondered, like, is he going back and looking through his archive and saying, this has something here, and it's worth me showing, because I think of him kind of as a perfectionist. And he's a little secretive and protective of his work. I don't think he puts out anything that he doesn't believe is good.
Who does? When you really come down to it,
that's true.
People can be deluded about things, but I've never met. I'm a pretty cynical guy in a lot of ways, but I don't think I've ever met anyone who knowingly put things into the world they thought were garbage.
Right.
Unless it's the kind of thing of assignment work that just pays so much that you don't want to turn it down, and you hate what the mission is, but you do it, and maybe you don't show those pictures or whatever. Right. But anything that you would show publicly with your name on it, I don't know anybody who doesn't want it to be good. The difference with someone with the standards of Jeff is, I think for some people the standard becomes much more specific. For some people it's just like, you'll see this in any forum, say Instagram. There are people who put up anything that strikes their own fancy that maybe they like it. And that's their criteria. Well, I like this picture because it's of my girlfriend. Or I like this picture because that was a really great meal. Or I like this picture because I think it freaks people out. It could be a million different motivations. In all of them is a belief that this is worth somebody seeing. But when your criteria starts getting really, really specific, and I think Jeff being older than me or you, and having been at it since way before I would have started even living his life, his selection criteria and criteria of what he'll share is going to be very refined.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things we could call good that he wouldn't want to share because of how he's going to feel about it. So it's the same for all of us, but our criteria gets more and more defined. That's my take.
I completely agree with you.
I may have diverted whatever question you were going to ask, but
there's no wrong answers though.
Yeah. Oh, I could find some. Yeah, and that I think about that a lot because I've gone through many chapters in my own version of that. You know, in the beginning it was just like, is it in fucking focus? You know, I mean, I was not talented, and I was good at understanding gadgetry, and I started on digital essentially. Well, I mean, my original foray into photography was on film. There was no digital yet, but that was pretty short-lived. And then when I came back to it with some intent, I wanted to use my first wife's film camera, but she was very negative about that after I started to run around with it, and so I had to get something of my own. I went digital just because made sense to not buy film, you know, if I could get away with it, and I already had a computer, so, you know, it just made sense, and it meant that I would be able to see immediate feedback, you know. But anyway, I was not talented, but I had an idea of how to learn how to use the camera, and I found out, this is a bit of a tangent, but I found out what the standard textbook was that they use at all the colleges, because it was I had an instinct it would be like the same book everywhere, and it is, and it's this book called Photography, which I bought, you know, the previous edition of to get a cheaper price, and you know, it's fine, you miss like 2 added paragraphs in the current edition, and I just absorbed everything in that book, and it still sucked, but I had a source, you know, somewhere to go. Thank God the iPhone hadn't come along yet, because I probably would have just gone with that if that had been around. But anyway, I've been through since then many chapters of my criteria getting refined, and through that, like, growing understanding of what the fuck it is I'm after. Because like I said in the beginning, it was just like, is it even possible for me to describe these nutty things I see all the time? And that was about the extent of my ambition. And then, you know, words like composition would start to haunt me. You know, you're like, what even is that? How am I doing that? How would I do that if I am not? You know, like, it was a total head scratcher to me. And so, you know, as each part of my process has unfolded, there's been always a little bit more like upping of the ante, not just for the activity, but what I'm interested in showing. And then if I'm really honest, sometimes my criteria about showing ends up relating a little bit to economics. You know, like my self-publishing of zines is part of what sustains me. Right? Not a lot of opportunities to make money with street photography.
No, I think that was just the most I could do at one time. Which is weird, but this isn't my camera. This is my girlfriend's father's camera. Well, I'm sorry to cut you off on that one. You said something about first 5 photos? Or
about what?
You said something about 5 images?
Oh, yeah. So let's say we're in the hospital district. Let's say there's 5 photos out of a 4 or 5 month period that I think are really happening. You know, like everyone else, I have a bunch that are kind of fun or interesting, but are maybe not on that level, I stick them in a zine.
Right.
You know, so I have 36 in a zine usually, and it's a number that I find I'm regularly able to come up with, but it doesn't mean all 36 are mega bangers or something.
Right.
It's like if I wanted to take on an even harder edged criteria, I'd be like, no, I'm not putting out another publication until I have 36 on the level of those 5.
Right.
Right? And maybe I'll get there someday, but there's a part of me that also really likes the informality of a zine and the idea that it's a place where I might put some of these potentially secondary images. And it's all such new work that to me it makes total sense to put it out that way, because I might change my mind 6 months later and feel like, no, there were a couple of those ones I thought were a little bit iffy that are pretty great. And then some of the great ones I might feel a little less stoked about. So, you know, the informality of a zine feels like such a great way for me to be at whatever my current criteria is, but it's partly driven by economics, you know. And I think people don't talk about those kind of issues enough. They try to make it themselves always seem like just such, you know, pure artists in a way.
Yeah.
Because who wants to admit that they do something to make a buck? Obviously, it's not the only reason. If all I was trying to do is make a buck, I'd do something entirely different.
Yeah.
You know, I'd start a photo contest, charge entry fees. That's how I'd make a buck.
Yeah. We don't have to get into that because yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'd go get a job. You know.
Right.
I'd go get a fucking job. That's if it was just about money. But the guy's got to make a living. Something's got to pay bills.
At the end of the day, I think you would agree with this. We didn't get into this to make money, per se.
Not for business reasons.
Yeah.
No. And I don't think if anybody does, they're insane. For one thing, and second of all, if they did, then I really just am completely bewildered why they would pick this.
Right.
Anyway, you know, I mean, I can empathize with all the various hustles people do to get over once they're in it, but yeah, I mean, I hope that's all it is. It'd be weird if it were like, I know how I'll become a big deal.
How to make $3,000 a month through street photography, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's like you know, those ads you see for you know, work at home and make lots of money stuffing envelopes, and you find out that what your job is to stuff envelopes with things that say, work at home, make a lot of money stuffing envelopes, you know. And so it's this pyramid, but that's what you get, you know, like, yeah, how to make $3,000 a month from street photography by telling other people how to make $3,000
yeah.
a month from street photography.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the only game in town, baby. But, you know, this points back at the truth that people don't want to hear about photography, which is that, or not about photography, about the business, is that today's professional photographer, our primary activities are selling gear and luxury products, gear and experiences to wealthy amateurs.
Right.
And as with everything else in my photo life, I've seen the precedent for it in music. Many of my friends now who are professional musicians or professional recording engineers and so on, they all have YouTube vlogs, and they, you know, are constantly doing things like gear reviews and you know, offering workshop kind of situations or you know, other kind of situations for people to take part in, online master classes, you know, all this stuff, which are experiences for people who got some bread. And some of them are completely valid and gifted practitioners of music themselves, and so that's cool. I'm not going to put anybody down for, you know, participating in that way, but that's the state of the economy of it all, right? when you don't have a music industry that people can plug themselves into and make a self-sustaining career out of, that's what we're left with right now in a capitalistic society. And photography is following close behind. We're losing outlets for interesting work. There's no shortage of photos being used and made, but the economy surrounding it all has completely changed. And I'm not one of the bitter ones, but I observe. I see where things have gone. And so, providing experience. Or do impressions
Yeah.
of other photographers. No one will know who they are.
Probably.
Probably. Certain ones might be too on the nose.
Okay, so I wanted to start by asking, a little about your origin story, where you're from, and how you discovered photography and ultimately found that it was something that was your passion.
Well, it's a long story because it's 40 years. I didn't start shooting until I was around 40. I'm I've been a little bit unable to pinpoint an exact moment. So I kind of counted from when I was aware of having a really distinct desire to get into it. I think it was either right before or after my 40th birthday.
Okay.
So that was 16 years ago. And but in the 40 years that led up to that, I was born in Washington, D.C., raised in Arlington, Virginia, dropped out of high school at 16. I was a musician. I was in a rock and roll band. We would tour around the South. Well, we called it touring. It was usually not for more than a week at a time, but we would do it a lot. And I was lucky to be in bands with people older than me at first who had a lot more freedom and autonomy and cars and things like that, and I benefited hugely. And then after, I was like 20 years old. I was working in a record store in DC and started to meet all these other people who, some of whom like to go up to New York for shows to go see people play. And me and this girl I was seeing, we used to go up to New York for shows, and her sister lived up here, so we'd stay for the whole weekend and stuff and run around. I just fell in love with New York City. We both kind of did, or at least we definitely saw that we needed to get the hell out of DC, that it was just felt like a real dead-end place to be. And so we moved here, and it really changed my life, and I experienced ways of being and living that were previously unknown to me, or known to me only through books and pictures. And I wouldn't realize it for many years, but I had grown up staring at pictures of things going on in New York City and seeing that as the authentic life, and where I lived in the white suburbs, the bullshit life,
Right.
So coming here was partly based in pictures. And at first I was still 100% into the music thing for quite a while, and then when I was about to turn 30, I seem to have these things happen at the beginnings of decades. Beginning of my 20s, I moved here, and then beginning of my 30s, I left here out of the fear that if I didn't try something else, I was just going to live the rest of my life as a New Yorker and have no idea what else I might have done, what other lives I might have been able to live. So I moved to Missoula, Montana. I lived there for most of a year. I was trying to become a writer, and I saw writing as a better long-term future than the music life, and a way for me to say things I couldn't say with music. And I felt like music. The music world was a very narrow-minded world to me, and musicians to me were very narrow, and I wanted to touch the whole world in some way. not with my output. I wanted to physically go and touch the world, and music felt like a long way around to that. So I wanted to try, and I'd never been without it. I'd been a musician since I was a little kid, doing live performances professionally from 13 years old. It had been all I knew, and getting away from New York and getting away from music simultaneously was an exploration, what else I might be. And I learned a hell of a lot from it, and I eventually came back to music after I bailed out of Missoula and lived in Seattle for a few years. It was a great place to regroup, meet really nice people, and it was a very interesting time to be there. End of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, a lot of change going on, but still a lot of the old Seattle that people had loved was still there. Still a lot of energy left over from the whole grunge explosion,
right.
But it wasn't in its most oppressive height where it would have been a dominant culture. It was all this different stuff there. It was a big literary community in Seattle. It was a very interesting time to be there. And then 9/11 happened, and I was overwhelmed with the feeling that I was in the wrong place, that I was spiritually supposed to be here. The idea of this city going through something that major and me not being here to witness it or to look at it or just to be a part of it felt insane. It felt wrong in the biggest way that you mean wrong, like morally and conceptually wrong, like seeing somebody float up off the ground because gravity doesn't exist, that kind of wrong. And so my first wife and I, she is also a former New Yorker, we decided to come back here. So we came back here together in 2002, June, and it was only a few years later that I started to get very interested in photography. I was back in music full time, but I still felt like I needed to be something outside it as well. I'd never had a hobby. Anything I ever got really interested in, I tried to make into a vocation because I didn't want to do anything else. So music, I'd practice it 12 hours a day and go play anywhere where they'd have me to make a buck because I didn't want to do anything else if I could help it. I had jobs over the years, but I tried to avoid it. And then when I was trying to be a writer, same thing. I did everything I could to not have jobs, to find ways to make a buck off of it, and wanted to be a working artist all the time. So back in New York, I'm back in the scene, struggling, but feeling like I could be more than this. And for whatever reason, I think after 20 years of saying, God, I wish I had a camera, when I would see something really insane on the streets of New York, I thought, well, I could buy one. Seemed pretty obvious. Well, I mean, at first I thought, well, I could use the one that's in my house. My first wife had an Olympus stylus. And I thought it was just a junk camera, and now I look back and go, wow, great first camera. I took a bunch of pictures with one, and then she didn't like me using her camera, and I started wanting to buy one, and she said, well, you shouldn't spend much money because you know what's going to happen. You're going to get sick of it in a short while, and then it's just going to sit there, and you're going to have wasted this money on this thing. And I was like, well, I'm going to show her,
Yeah, a little bit of a negative thing to say, but
yeah. And here it is 16 years later, and this is my life. I work hard at this thing every day, and I work hard to help other people every day, and I can't believe what difference photography's made in my life. It's made all of these things very real in my life that I used to just think about, and has given me a platform for things that there was no platform for in my music life or my writing life. The best thing, though, is that all of my experiences with music and writing have carried right on into this. Not at first. At first, I'm just trying to figure out how to not have the camera shaking so much that everything's blurry. But pretty soon, I started to discover that everything that was confusing to me about photography, there was an answer for in my experience as a musician or my experience in writing. And that's never stopped since the first time I noticed it. The first time that I solved a problem in photography was something I already knew from music. I was like, wow, that's really cool. There's probably a lot more things like that I can, discover. And it never stops being true. And I mean that about the making of pictures, the editing of pictures, the showing of pictures, the business of selling pictures or of doing jobs, whatever it is, and of the way I teach. It's like completely based in my history with music. When you can see fundamentals in any art form, I don't care what it is, when you really understand fundamentals in one art form, it applies to just about any other art form you can think of. I really believe that. So I'm lucky that I learned something really hard in music. I was much more talented as a musician, but I became very dissatisfied with relying on that talent when I was around 20, 21, when I came to New York. I started to understand that, oh my gosh, I could be, if I actually studied this, and found mentors and challenged myself to be the things that are uncomfortable, not just what it comes easily to me, I might really get good. And so I really worked hard on being a good musician, to develop musicianship and be able to work with people who are world-class musicians. And I sacrificed immense amounts to be able to do that. And that's another thing that carries over from art form to art form. When you've lived for something like that, when you didn't get into it because, this would be a good career for me, when you got into something because you couldn't bear to not do it, that doesn't ever leave you unless you just become dead inside. If you're still a person living your values, then you'll do it in that art form, or you'll do it in another one, or you'll do it in the way you raise your kids or something, but you're going to have that understanding of what it is to do something out of total compulsion. People talk about passion, I'm not against it, but passion is a little bit reliant on emotion in a way, the way most people describe it or achieve it. I have a passion for gardening, so they do a lot of gardening, but to be so driven to do something that you can't bear to not do it, and not doing it means constant fantasizing about it. That obsession that artists have is impossible to manufacture. I can really help people strengthen their practices in my workshops. Some people come in, they've had very spotty practices. I can absolutely help them. Can I make them have that thing that drives me, that makes me just sick inside if I don't get to go out photographing? No. That's okay. But I think when you have that, you recognize it in all of its guises. It can come up in other ways. So that's years 0 through 40 and beyond.
What does photography mean to you?
In which sense?
I was thinking in a general sense, because, it means different things to different people, personally.
Well,
You kind of answered it a little bit.
I mean, if you mean what does it mean in my life,
Yeah,
that's one thing.
Sure.
If you're asking what is it in my view,
what does it mean in your life?
in my life, it's the. So for me, photography, as I'm doing it, it's a practice that enables me to have a place in the world, a place that connects me to the world. I had a epiphany when I was early in grad school. I was speaking before about how these 10-year milestones in my life, I go through these big shifts. The one I went through at 50 was I decided to go to grad school. And I mentioned before, I dropped out of high school when I was 16. I never went back, never went to college. So I made it to 50 without any degree, not even a high school diploma really. I did get a GED at one point, but I didn't use it for anything. And so at 50 I had this scheme to go to grad school, get an MFA. And I was very fortunate to go to Goddard College in Vermont, a low residency MFA program that was interdisciplinary. So no photo orthodoxy spoken here. No darkroom facilities, no photo teachers, no photographers on faculty to speak of. One person who's a bit of a photo-related academic, but she's not really a photographer of life unfolding like what we do. And it was perfect for me. I was massively stimulated intellectually and artistically by the cohort I found there. And what was really great was the epiphany that I had very early on was that when I was a kid, like maybe in like 7th or 8th grade, I absorbed somehow this idea that an artist's life was 24/7. That there was no art-making time and normal life time. That artists that I admired, they were just living it all the time. It was a very unrealistic and immature assumption. No one told me this. It wasn't presented to me. I didn't tell anyone else about it. I wasn't even fully conscious of this, but I recognize now that at a formative stage, I developed this assumption, and that it fed a lifelong frustration. I was constantly having to wait to do the thing, whether it was, needing the right equipment or needing the right group of people to work with on a band, or, and then you have a band, you need space to practice in, you need vehicles to bring the gear from there to rehearsal, from rehearsal to gig, and then, you need a gig. You need a place to perform. You need all these things you keep needing, and all of them mean more waiting. Even you go on tour, you're like, oh boy, we get to play every night. It's an hour and a half a night. The rest of the time, you're driving cars and moving heavy things and calling people, going, where the hell is this place I'm supposed to be? All of this not art-making stuff. And I was always frustrated and I didn't really understand why until I was a photographer and I went, wait a minute. I don't ever have to wait, ever again. I can take a picture any damn time I want. If there's something that I want to take a picture of, it's always possible. And I felt so freed by that. And it meant that I don't have to take a picture all the time, right? Like I could go hours and, I'm not taking pictures. I don't have to. But the possibility that I could makes me feel so relaxed in a way that I never could feel before. So much less resentful towards circumstances. I'm at some social occasion that my wife wants me to be at, and I'm okay, because something might happen that I might want to take a picture of.
Yeah.
Might not, but it might, right? So just the possibility is, to me, a huge contrast from being at a thing like that and going like, well, it's not like I can, bust out an instrument and start playing. That would be obnoxious. It's not what's asked for. Like I feel like photography was such a perfect fit for me because it turns out I needed something that I can just live all the time, have available all the time. And from early in my time in photography, I would hear about people who were like some of these documentary hot shots or whatever, who like they would have to, go home, work day jobs full time for, months at a time to save up the money to buy all the film they needed to go off to some far-flung land where they were doing their project, their long-term project, where they had to go repeatedly over and over to some war-torn place or whatever. And I thought, wow, that sounds amazing. I'll never do that because I don't want to wait. I don't want to spend months saving up money to get to, whatever stand. Like I want to work every day. I want to walk out my door and be working from the minute I step outside. I want to be working when I'm at a party. I want to be working when I'm anytime I'm awake. Basically, I want to be working. And if I do other things, I can't really do that the same way. Now that being said, in retrospect, now that I've had that epiphany, there are times where I look back on my previous art life and music and so on, and I can see ways I could have changed my my thinking or my approach and come closer to this kind of way of living in it. Part of it is a matter of perspective on the various other activities you do surrounding the thing. Like, we're not always shooting, but we're still taking part in all these photo-related activities, and some of that counts to me now. And when I was a musician, it was hard for me to feel that as being enough, at various times. But that being said, I just can't imagine anything being more perfect for my psychological issues than photography. This works.
Okay. To get a little more specific, I don't know if this question will be obnoxious or not, but why street photography?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't know that was a thing. It was just my instinct of what to do when I had a camera. You take a picture of the cat, you take a picture of, something out your window, and then you go outside. I mean, there was never any other thought in my mind. And the thought in my mind had been there since I first moved here. I remember still, and I've written about this, walking down the street the first day as a New Yorker and just seeing all these little frozen moments all around me. I had no idea that what I was having was the impulse to photograph. I just had this strange thing in my inner life where I would see people walking the other way or doing things off on the side of the sidewalk, and I'd see all these little heightened moments in those interactions, whatever they were, gesture, facial expression, whatever it was. And in my mind, I would freeze them, like the montage intro of TV shows I like. Like I have a vague recollection that the opening titles of like The Odd Couple have these moments where they're doing things and then the camera freezes and then they have like a credit on something, whatever. Like that was a real regular trope in intros and outros of TV series when I was a kid in the 70s. And I don't know, maybe that's part of it. Got cemented in my inner life because I absorbed tons of TV as a little kid. But for whatever reason, I was just seeing all those things and freezing them in my mind, and it just didn't occur to me that that's what a camera does. And then, 20 years later, when I started photographing for real, yeah. So I was seeing that way and just not connecting it to the right thing. I forget what your actual question was.
Why specifically street photography?
Right. So being on the street and looking for the things that were unparaphrasable was the whole point. Like the idea was, I tried being a writer, and I could describe things in words. I can see amazing things, and obviously I like to talk. I could talk to you all about what I saw and tell a story, and that's fine, but it just didn't seem like the way it should be transmitted. It felt to me like these things that I'm seeing, they're ruined as soon as I tell you about it. You needed to just see it. That thought was in my head a lot. You need to just see it. And so the camera went into the street with me, hoping maybe I'd get lucky enough and quick enough to even render them at all. Even then, like just the idea of a good photograph or a photograph that exhibited a personal voice was hardly in my head. It was all just like, could I even, get it? But it was, my instinct was absolutely to go to the street. And it was probably another couple years before I ever heard the term street photography. When I heard it, I was so happy. I was like, oh, that sounds like what I do. I'm about street photography. That's a thing. I thought I was just taking pictures. And now I really like to just be taking pictures and not be doing street photography. But that's the whole problem of genre. It's powerful. It has a history. It has icons. It has heroes. It has and when you attach yourself to something like that, you feel like you have a little added validity. I'm just a dope walking around with a camera. I'm part of a continuum of artists, and especially here in New York, the spiritual center of street photography.
Yeah.
But ultimately, all of that stuff is bogus. All of that genre stuff, because that's what keeps us from growing. That's what keeps us from being free in our heads, which is where the best stuff comes from. So I try not to think about street anything as I live my life every day exactly there on the street. Big part of what I'm doing, but not the only part anymore.
When did you realize that you wanted to teach, and how has that affected you personally by sharing your knowledge of your art and craft?
Well, I had been a teacher before of music, occasionally, not really steadily, but from time to time I was teaching. And it had been on my mind a little when I was still trying to write. I thought that the discoveries I was making might be useful to somebody else, and that might be a way for me to make a little money while I'm suffering trying to write one of 3. I wouldn't have thought of myself as having any ability to teach for several years, and then this was around 10 years ago, I got asked to write a piece of curriculum for a correspondence school, and I did that, sort of like an introductory little thing about street photography. And the school liked what I did so much that they asked me to write some other stuff and appear in a video about it. And then I became, they offered me this job evaluating students' projects. And the job was, I would look at what they turned in for their previous units' assignments and give them feedback by voice, by MP3. It was so cute. I'd recorded like a 10-minute MP3 and upload it to a server, and they'd send it to the student. So I didn't know these people. It was like a very strange job, but I found I really, really enjoyed it. And I felt like it was a way for me to get much clearer in my own head about the stuff that I believe, the stuff that I know. Especially because I wasn't asked to teach the courses, just evaluate the photos. So I mean, I saw some of these courses; they were largely garbage, total garbage. And the first course they had me doing these evaluations on the most was a course on Photoshop. It wasn't even a course on photography. And I told the guy who hired the teachers, I said, I don't really use Photoshop. I don't really know much about it. He said, you'll be fine. And he was right, because I didn't have to teach Photoshop. I just had to evaluate people. And I learned a shitload from doing that job. And I'm so into learning that I've just tried since then to keep doing some form of teaching. For a few years that was just occasional consulting for someone, or getting like roles as a guest speaker at a college, like I did little one-day workshops at NYU multiple times, and it was really fun. I found, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't just something to do for a buck. I don't like things that you do just for a buck. I like to feel like I'm doing something that relates back to my obsession. So I remember after one of my NYU talks or workshops, the faculty member there who had brought me in, she was an old friend of mine and a real academic, like a real career academic. And she said, "You bastard, we've got to get you an advanced degree so I can make people hire you here. You should be teaching here, not just visiting." And I thought, wow, first of all, thanks, but second of all, that's a tall order. How am I don't even have a high school education, how am I going to get over with that? So I kind of put that in the back burner for a couple of years, and then like I said, when I turned 50, I thought maybe there's a way. I had heard about people, even in our community, who went to grad school without having gone to college. I knew it was possible to get into an MFA program. It just might be difficult, and it was. It was super, super difficult. But I found a way, and a big part of my reason for going was I need what grad students call the letters. I just need to come out of there with those letters, MFA, so that I can even apply for a university job, which I couldn't do. You have to have a terminal degree to do these things. So I went for the MFA letters, but I knew I wanted it to be more than just an exercise in earning the qualification. I wanted to really take it deep if I could. So I designed with my advisors a whole program for myself of going deep on what I was already doing, not on making up some new version of it to satisfy some stupid, preconception of what an art degree should require or a documentary focus should require, any of these divisions, but just what am I doing and what's it about and what are the ethical considerations of it, what are the community implications of it, and what are the spiritual implications of it for myself. Incredible amount of soul searching and research, and it fuels me every day now in the teaching that I do. I started teaching workshops during my graduate study. It was my graduate program had a requirement called a it's on the tip of my tongue. Boy, do I feel stupid now. You'll have to edit this.
That's okay.
All I have in my head right now are words that are not that word. maybe it'll come to me after I describe it, so I'll just rephrase it. In my graduate program, they have this part that you do in your second or third semester that was supposed to be sort of an experimental project. Doing something that you previously had not really done as a way of ultimately of research, right? So in my case, they call it a practicum, right? Very heady word. So my practicum that I designed was to lead a photo workshop at my home studio, and I did it, and I wrote all about it and documented and everything, and I absolutely loved it. It was just so stimulating and so exciting to see somebody, like one of my students in that first workshop. She had never done anything serious in photo ever. She only used her iPhone. She, didn't have any particular ambition to be a photographer with a capital P. And she came away from that workshop with a solid little body of work. And this is a person who came in, and the first thing she said was, not interested in taking pictures of people. I'm not very comfortable with that, and I don't think I'm going to, be into that. And I was like, okay, what do you like? And she showed me what she was doing, and I thought, there's no reason we can't go deep with this if we really know what we're talking about, And so the students I had in that first workshop, I just never forget how willing they were to make what they were doing a laboratory for personal growth. I don't mean personal growth like I become more confident or something, but like really getting into your own personal shit, and questioning that, and through that comes growth. So I was just completely hooked, and I've tried to keep it going ever since then. There have been some ups and downs. Lately it's up, and I just love it. It's like a core part of my practice now. That was really where I got the chance to look at anything current. It was entirely Flickr. Or sometimes it'd be an article on a blog or something, Here's 10 street photographers working you should check out, that kind of crap. But there wasn't anything like what there is now.
Right.
And there wasn't almost any chance that I would run into one of you by walking around. Now, I talk to somebody almost every day.
Right.
On the street.
It's exploded.
Every day. That was unthinkable 10 years ago. Only 10 years. It's a very short amount of time.
And I'm sure it'll become more and more and more.
Could be, or we could be seeing the crest of something, because, as I said, I think back to my experience in music. So around the time that I was moving out west and getting away from the music, a portion of the music I was heavily involved in, so-called free jazz, which is like the street photography of music. It went through this really brief, really powerful heyday, where all of a sudden, like, college kids got really interested in it, and it was like getting written about in the rock and roll magazines and stuff. It was this like really wild moment. All of a sudden, everybody got a record out who had like been unrecordable before, and people were sent on tour who were ignored before. It was this big moment. And for a lot of people who were still in it, unlike me who had run away, they were like, oh man, we finally made it. We waited long enough, and now our thing is big news,
Yeah.
And it didn't last. What did last is it completely seems to have permanently punctured the mainstream of jazz, to where now if you pick up a copy of Downbeat magazine or turn on a lot of jazz radio stations or whatever, you might hear about some relatively progressive, forward-thinking jazz artists who don't sound like they made music in the 50s, like some real visionary shit, mixed in with things that are a little more vanilla. And that's been a sort of permanent change, but it's not like the whole scene came with them. right? So I could easily imagine the current explosion of street photography going that way. If you just look at one segment of your own community, you'll see that unfold. Some people, they start to branch off more into commercial work. Some people start to branch off more into like kind of documentary projects.
Mm-hmm.
Some people give up photography entirely. They get into some other shit. Some people die.
Yeah.
Some people go into academia. All these various ways people go. The young people you see out on the street right now, you don't know if there are replacements coming up behind them once they move on. And some of them will stay. Some of them will keep at it.
There's a lot of drop off, I feel.
There has to be. There has to be. Not everybody has this in them, and they certainly don't necessarily have it over the long term. And I wouldn't have even known to expect I would have it for the long term. My history suggests that by now I would have been like, oh, that was great, but there's this other thing.
Right.
Because I did that multiple times. But it's been the opposite for me. Like, I feel like I'm at a point where I look at what I'm doing with photography and just think, I want to just do this the rest of my life. I really do. And I think it's the kind of thing I could do the rest of my life as long as I can still walk. And even if I can't, maybe there's a way I can still do it, just to change it to my physical abilities. But while I'm still able to walk around and suck oxygen, I'm into it.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't blame anyone for stopping.
I mean,
especially when there's 8 others on the same corner with you. I don't find any appeal in that.
Yeah, there's been times early on, and even kind of recently, that I wanted to give up, stop.
Yeah.
I got to a point where recently where I'm satisfied with what I have done. So if I never took another outstanding image in my mind or whoever's mind, whatever, I'm still happy with what I've created.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm content with that, but then I got to do more. It comes down to the obsession, where it's like, I've done something that I consider good, but I can continue to do this, continue to be good, hopefully, and maybe one day, this might sound cynical, maybe I could be great. I think with anybody that's great at anything, it's consistently being good over a long course of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, certainly to build up what we now like to define as a great life's work takes a lot of time. And I've stressed over that since I didn't start until I was already an old guy. 40 years old. Like, how much time does that leave me to build up a life's work? Right?
Sit on this side?
Well, I can't change that. It is what it is. But I can show the hell up now, right? And I can bring, as I said, I can bring all of this stuff with me that I learned in my previous artistic endeavors. So I have that at least. You got to use whatever you got.
Yes.
So I am learning to accept my late start in photography as the appropriate start for me with photography. Tom Roma tried to tell me this years ago. I was introducing myself to him, or someone was introducing me to him, and I started babbling about myself as one does, and I said, I came to photography late, and I was trying to, find my next words, and he said, no, at exactly the right time. And I was like, okay, I feel you. I knew what he was driving at, that we go through things in our life that lead us to where we're supposed to be on a kind of cosmic level. That, some of us, we got other things to do before we get to this thing or that thing. And, for all I know, this last 16 years of hard work could be preparing me for the thing I'm going to do 4 years from now that's got nothing to do with pictures. But I doubt it. I think I'm here to stay with this medium if I can see, and I think that when you talk about getting good, again, it's all a process of becoming more you, right? So if you're following the voices of people that say, here's what you do to make a good picture, or here's what a good picture is, now go do that, that doesn't really have anything to do with the process.
Yeah.
I see guys like you and guys like me doing.
Yeah, I don't think you can tell anybody this is how you can get a good picture. All I think you can do is tell people your experience and what you have done. Maybe that'll be applicable, but you can't really tell someone how to do something, at least in art, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with that. I think there are things to talk about in pictures that, to me, are, even if they're a little bit debatable or a matter of taste, there are things that we can verify that have an effect, right? And we can talk about those things, functionally, or like Stephen Shore can talk to you all day about it, about just the effect of where things fall in a frame, along an edge, and the tension that has, or things being in the center, and the resolution that has, and all the various functional realities of the picture. And there are art historians who can tell you a lot more deep information about it than I ever could. But when it comes to the getting good, which is the phrase that a lot of us will come back to without very clearly defining what we mean, I think what we mean is to have an innate working process and to have some kind of reliable results. We know we can't guarantee results. We know that the really, really great pictures are rare, but we can feel like, all right, I'm consistently on the path, so that's partly a matter of practice, and it's partly a matter of understanding. And I feel like I'm on the path, and I know what it feels like to see people kind of missing the path.
Right.
And so I love to be able to point people at the path and say, I can't tell you what moves to make. I can't tell you the right place to be or the right outcome, but I can help you judge it when we look at it, and I can point you at the path because I know where it is. That's kind of the way I see it. I haven't articulated it quite that way before, but I think that's really where it's at.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.